My name's Carolyn Jackson, and my main area of research interest is in gender and education. So I've researched and published on lad and ladette cultures in secondary schools, publishing a book in 2006 called Lads and Ladettes in School, Gender and a Fear of Failure. I've researched laddish teachers, gender and fear in education, on gender and transitions between inter-secondary school and into higher education, and I've worked on young femininities, publishing an edited collection in 2010 with Carrie Pachter and Emma Reynolds. I've also done work on the PhD examination process with Penny Tinkler at Manchester University, and we published a book called The Doctoral Examination Process, which is a handbook for students, examiners and supervisors. What I'm going to speak about today is single-sex schooling, because the debate about single-sex versus co-educational schooling is a long-standing one, and it shows no sign of abating. Although the emphasis shifts slightly, and at the moment there's also interest in whether single-sex classes in co-educational schools have benefits, and I talk about that separately in another video. But although the debate is very long-standing, it could be one that's seen to generate more heat than light, in that although people often have very strong views about whether single-sex or co-ed schooling is better, actually the evidence in support of one or another is less strong. So, and this is despite quite a lot of research on this topic in various countries around the globe, including England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Northern Ireland and the USA. But there's no consistent overall conclusion about which type of schooling is better. The arguments generally revolve around four key issues, and those are academic attainment, curriculum and subject choice, children's experiences of schooling, and then social concerns, which really focuses on preparation for life beyond schooling. So I'll start by talking a little bit about academic attainment. So advocates of single-sex schooling frequently point to school league tables as evidence of this academic superiority of single-sex schools. And this is because many of the best performing schools in terms of exam results are single-sex. However, the research paints a much more complex picture. In order to assess how important the gender of a school's intake is for academic attainment, we need to be able to compare like with like. In other words, to compare schools that are the same in all regards other than whether they're single-sex or co-educational. And in practice, this is impossible to do. Schools differ in a whole host of ways, including the social background of the students, the ability levels of the intake when they join the school, the way the school's managed, the skills of the teaching staff, the ethos of the school and so on. So while researchers can select schools that are as similar as possible, they can never, and they can attempt to control for various differences in their analyses, it's not possible to control for all differences, and you're never going to really be comparing like with like. And the problems of comparing like with like are exacerbated by the fact that single-sex schools are often located in very particular sectors of education. So in England, for example, single-sex schools are often located in the private sector, and it's this positioning that largely accounts for the high rankings in performance tables. So overall then, comparing like with like is very difficult, or really it's impossible to do. Having said that, the weight of evidence that's generated by researchers who have come closest to being able to compare like with like suggests that there are numerous variables that influence academic attainment, most notably the social background of the students and the ability levels of the intake. Furthermore, the research suggests that these factors are more influential in terms of examination results than whether a school is single-sex or co-educational. So moving on to the second factor, which was curriculum and subject choice. Views about whether single-sex schooling is advantageous in terms of giving girls and boys equal access to the curriculum have changed over time. In general, today, evidence suggests that there's less gender polarisation of subject choice and subject preferences among students who are taught in single-sex schools than those who are taught in co-ed schools. So, for example, a recent study led by Diana Leonard showed that, other things being equal, girls were significantly more likely to study male-dominated subjects and less likely to study female-dominated subjects if they'd attended single-sex schools than co-ed. The third factor, which was experiences of schooling, is an important one to bring into this. The current educational climate is one in which academic performance and the acquisition of credentials are emphasised. But it's really important not to downplay the significance of educational experiences for children in schooling. And much of the small-scale research that was undertaken in the 1970s and 80s suggested that girls' experiences of co-ed schooling were problematic in a variety of ways. For example, the research suggested that boys dominated in the classroom in terms of teacher time, in terms of space, that sexual harassment of girls by boys in the classroom wasn't uncommon, that boys' contributions to classroom discussions were taken more seriously than girls' contributions, and so on. Now, of course, it's important to note that not all boys are dominant in the classroom, and not all girls are quiet and shy. And the research that's been conducted more recently tends to be much more attentive to these differences than the work conducted in the 70s and 80s. So it's important to think about differences within gender groups as well as differences between them. Nevertheless, evidence suggests that gendered patterns of behaviour identified in the 70s and 80s do persist in some co-educational schools today and are important to consider. Social concerns. There's very little research really on the long-term social consequences of single-sex and co-ed schooling. Many advocates of co-education argue that mixed schools are essential so that girls and boys can learn to live and work together. In general, their argument is that that schools should reflect real life, society is mixed, and therefore schools should also be mixed. Some advocates of girls' schools, on the other hand, argue exactly the opposite. They suggest that the fact that girls' schools don't mirror real life is a key reason to have them, because they argue that in general Western societies are male-dominated, women are frequently second place to men in terms of, amongst other things, pay and power. So actually schools and teachers need to challenge and change these inequalities rather than to reproduce them in schools. So proponents of this argument suggest that single-sex schools can be spaces where girls can begin to challenge male dominance and power, where girls can learn that they don't have to take second place to boys and that they can work free from harassment and taunt and that they can do science. So what little empirical evidence exists regarding the long-term social consequences of single-sex and mixed schooling reveals that there are no real differences in personal or social development of girls and boys in these school types. Evidence suggests, for example, that there's no significant difference between students who attend single-sex schools and students who attend co-ed schools in terms of how easy or difficult they found it to adjust to university life. And similarly, Diana Leonard's recent study revealed that there are no real differences between those who went to single-sex or co-ed schools in terms of how they rate the quality of their relationships or in terms of the likelihood of getting married. So overall then, the debate is complex and multifaceted, and there's no easy or straightforward answer to the question which are better, single-sex or co-ed schools.